After a series of killers who take their work way too seriously, I guess it's time for a wacky thrill killer. In this case, a mad bomber what bombs at midnight. After being chased out of a Washington, D.C. bar for hogging up a table all by himself, a man walks across the street, makes a 911 call, and punches in a few numbers. A few moments later, he stands and watches as the bar detonates right in his face. Frank, meanwhile, is watching a fictional game between the Rockets and Supersonics when he flips over to the news and sees the aftermath of the bombing. He immediately grabs his go bag, even though the Millennium group hasn't even called him yet. Of course they do, immediately after Catherine points that out. The episode opens with a quote from Jean-Paul Sartre. "I am responsible for everything except my very responsibility." Which puts this episode very much at odds with many of the ones that follow. More on that in a bit. Because it's Washington, D.C., every major law enforcement group is involved, being run by Holland Manor's himself, Sam Anderson. Anderson plays Agent Jack Pierson here, and like many guest stars who work in the Bureau, he's a total pro. But since he's played by Sam Anderson, I know he's going to be wrong at least 75% of the time. Of course, many terrorist groups are taking responsibility, which lets the voiceover actors really go for it on those characterizations.
Take heed, agents of Zog. Tonight's hellfire is only the beginning.
The ANO claims 13 lives as payment for the continuing oppression of our people.
What else can I say but yikes? The last call is a series of tones dialed in right before the bombing. Frank figures out that 522666 is dial pad code for kaboom. It's not quite hair today, gone tomorrow, but we got another cheeky killer on our hands. The bomb expert notes that the bomb was professionally made with 3 redundancies in case of malfunction, but Frank says that the bomb was placed haphazardly where anyone could find it, which gives the group mixed signals. He heads across the street and finds the bomber's cigarettes and semen-soaked napkin? Ew. Apparently the bomber was so jazzed about setting off the bomb, he jizzed. The bomber's expertise is on display, and it's like a who's who of bomb building techniques. Egyptian, IRA. They don't say Oklahoma City bomber, but it's implied. Frank also thinks that the bomber is likely to monitor law enforcement chatter to see how he's perceived. So only Frank is allowed to use his cell phone to communicate. Frank and Pierson use the phone to bait the bomber into calling Frank directly in hopes of using triangulation to track him.
Hello?
The bomber calls again, but this time Frank taunts him by hanging up and then making fun of the name Kaboom as a criminal mastermind name.
Sounds like that little guy in the Flintstones.
Lost it.
That was Kazoo, by the way.
The bomber has delusions of grandeur, though, which you can tell by how obsessed he is with referring to both himself and Frank as stars. And I mean, the bomber does kind of look like a young Pedro Pascal, so I can't really argue it. The next night's stakeout is interrupted by Catherine, which is frustrating, but it's also Frank's fault for not telling her that his phone is being monitored. The bomber calls immediately after and taunts him by mentioning Catherine by name. He moves from calling himself a star to calling himself an artist. Desperate to keep him on the line, Frank describes the moment of detonation in a way that comes off a bit homoerotic.
The only arousal is the moment of fire. Feel the heat upon your face.
This episode is going some places, psychologically speaking. Unfortunately, Catherine overheard Frank's side of the conversation while on the other line, and now she's freaked out for him. The bomber's behavior puts Frank at wit's end, especially since he hasn't slept in 2 days. Frank is worried because the bomber is getting closer and closer to getting caught, which means he's trying to maximize the thrill. A sort of detonation-based edging. They trace the calls to downtown DC, where Frank finds another cigarette right before a blast. The bomber tells him that that was just the start, so Frank rushes into the building to find a second bomb, only to be pushed out of the way of the blast by the bomber himself. Frank wakes up in the hospital to find Catherine, who tells him that he was saved by Raymond Dees, a man being treated by local media as a hero and a star. Upon seeing him, and more likely hearing him talk, Frank immediately knows that this is Kaboom. They check the press footage from the first bombing, and sure enough, there's Dees pulling people from the rubble. Pierson is reluctant to arrest him, though, especially after the Richard Jewell situation in Centennial Park.
Now, if Richard Jewell is indeed the bomber, he seems to fit what is called the hero syndrome.
Psychiatrists say some criminals crave publicity so much they'll actually hurt others just to take credit for later saving them.
This episode would have aired only 4 months after that bombing, and given the episode's plot, it would have been hard not to acknowledge the similarities. Turns out Raymond is a maintenance worker in the second building that was bombed. He was an explosive specialist in the Middle East, so it's pretty clear that they have the right guy. Frank explains that Dees needed to be in the middle of the blast and see himself on TV because just watching from across the street wasn't enough of a thrill. Frank is still out of it from the lack of sleep and the blast, which probably gave him a concussion. Pierson sends him home, but once Frank gets in his car, he gets a call from Dees. Dees is set up in the same parking lot and is about to push the button on another bomb when a SWAT member shoots him right through the head. It turns out there never was a final bomb, though, either in Frank's car or in Dees' car. Dees was simply controlling his own method of execution and ensuring he'd go out in a blaze of glory. And indeed, the news crews set up and start building the myth of the lone bomber who terrorized a city. And we're out. The quote from Sartre to open the episode refers to man's inability to change destiny because destiny does not exist. Therefore, each man is either free or cursed to control his own fate, depending on how you look at it. Of course, that philosophy underpins Raymond Dees' motivations in this episode. Sartre's most famous dictum is that existence precedes essence, which means that you are not born with an identity. It's something that you build over the course of your life through your actions. Raymond Dees believed himself to be an artist and a star, so he created the conditions in which he would be recognized as a star. He wasn't born a bomber, of course. He chose to become one. He is radically defining himself and creating meaning for himself. Unlike many Millennium villains, Dees isn't motivated by fate. No devil made him do it. He bombs places because he wants to affect the lives of other people, and he wants to be acknowledged for affecting those lives. The word Sartre used was angoisse, which translates to an intense dread or anguish, especially in the face of being responsible for the creation of one's own meaning in life. If we divorce morality from his decisions, Dees certainly was successful in defining himself according to his own terms. Frank recognizes these ideals, although he seems to be running low on patience throughout the episode. While Dees is spouting off about what a great star he is, Frank's retorts are basically on the level of, "I hope she sees this, King," and then posting a troll face. Thank God this episode didn't air in 2015, or else Frank would have said his name was Dees too. Dees nuts! Actually, hearing Lance Henriksen's gravelly voice deliver a Dees nuts joke might have been worth it. Also, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but this is one of the few episodes that showcases Frank's investigative abilities rather than his weird psychic flashes. And yes, I know that they're not psychic flashes, but come on. All in all, this is a comparatively breezy departure from the usual demons and religious zealots episodes that make up most of the first season. Dees is a Sartrean villain who does Sartrean villain things and, in his way, wins at the end of the episode. He becomes the media sensation that he always wanted to be. And yet, he's forgotten about in the very next episode.